All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our fourth semi-annual Catalyst Day. Thank you guys for joining us. Our group now, we have group number 4, and their topic is Saving Future Generations, Lowering the Possibility of School Shootings.
All right, so my name is Leah. I'm one of the presenters today.
My name is Liz. I'm also one of the presenters.
My name is Tommy. I'm also one of the presenters.
Hi, my name is Ryan.
My name is McKenna.
Okay, so before we begin, we do want to let you guys know that our presentation includes a story about a school shooter, survivor, information on school shooters, mental illnesses, and school shooting drills that may trigger survivors. If during our presentation you don't feel comfortable, feel free to leave at any time. We will understand. During Valentine's Day of 2018, David Hogg was sitting in his science class when he heard a gunshot. Unsure of what he heard, he turned to one of his friends to confirm. After this gunshot was fired, the fire alarm went off, making everybody think that it was a fire drill. Everybody started to walk outside, heading towards the shooter. This is when they got stopped by a janitor who told them the school was under an attack and they were heading the way the shooter was. A teacher then made all of them enter your classroom where they waited. David and his classmates waited in this classroom for about an hour until the SWAT team came and rescued them. During this hour, they were texting their goodbyes to their parents, preparing for their death, and some of them were even having panic attacks. After being rescued, David met with his father and sister. This is when David learned that one of his sister's friends had been killed and is one of the 17 people that died that day. School shootings have been in it for over 21 years that as a nation we have failed to stop. These attacks affect students, teachers, parents, and community members. School shootings are also more common in the US than any other country, such as Mexico, South Africa, and India. Numbers of shootings have become more common in the past decade and have triggered an outbreak. We don't yet have any evidence on why this happens, but we are leaning towards bullying, access to guns, and problems at home. Those who are involved in school shooting report to experience PTSD, anxiety, and or depression after the fact. We propose a program that will significantly lower the chances of a school shooting and will help students along the way. So in this chart, like I mentioned before, school shootings happen in the US 57 more times than anywhere else. So as you guys can see, in the United States, there have been 208 shootings since January 1st of 2009. Compared to Mexico, South Africa, India, and more, that's a pretty high number. So that's it for this chart.
As Liz stated previously, gun violence in our schools is a massive problem, more so the United States than anywhere else in the world, which directly or indirectly affects millions of students each year. According to PolitiFact, a school shooting is defined as an incident that occurs on school property when students, faculty, and or staff are on the premises in which one or more student or faculty member is injured or killed. In the in the United States, there have been 1,316 school shootings since 1970. And in recent years, these tragedies have become more and more frequent, with 18% of this total coming within the last 8 years since the 2012 tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Research has shown that these shootings tend to be quote unquote contagious after another shooting after one shooting, clusters of shooting tend to happen in relatively close proximity. Research suggests that this contagion is driven by widespread and immediate international and national media coverage of the events. From 2015 to 2018, the average number of days between school shootings was 77 days. And conversely, from 1999 to 2014, the average number of days between school shootings was 124 days. So this is showing a very alarming trend in the negative direction, with more and more school shootings happening and increasing rates, as stated previously. So yeah, many developed nations obviously see gun violence and see violence in schools, but this seems to be a magnitude of unique proportion, especially to the United States, and is only getting worse as years go by. Many studies and much research has gone into not only understanding the mind of the shooters carrying out these acts, but the short and long-term mental health impacts that we do see in the survivors of these incidents. The families of the victims and survivors of these tragedies will face lifelong effects ranging from disabilities to injury, mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, insomnia, and overall trust issues, distrust of authority, and things of that sort that we see in victims of trauma such as these incidents. Many students will suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and other trauma-related mental illnesses. The National Center for PTSD estimates that 28% of people who have witnessed the mass shooting develop post-traumatic stress disorder, and about a third develop what is known as acute stress disorder. In addition to the number of students who suffer from PTSD and other trauma-related mental illnesses, antidepressant use among students has rapidly increased, and can be seen as correlation to the rise in school shootings that we see in the United States. In the aftermath of these shootings, survivors and victims will typically experience 3 stages of healing, according to a 2017 research bulletin compiled by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. These phrases will represent themselves in different ways in many people, but tend to follow 3 similar pathways. One will be the acute phase, immediately after the aftermath of the shooting. The intermediate phase can be seen several days later, and the long-term phase, months to potentially years and years after the fact and after the incident has occurred. The acute phase can be represented by symptoms that we often see in other survivors of these traumatic incidences, as previously stated, such as denial, shock, fear, and overall feeling of helplessness. Experts believe that in this acute phase and in the period immediately after the shooting has occurred is when victims can receive the most potential help and from professionals in order to help them overcome these mental health issues as a result of these shootings. And the intermediate and long-term phase, we see professionals setting up long-term goals and long-term support systems in order to help the victims of these shootings and to give them the resources available or resources they need in order to overcome the trauma that they encountered. So many students will all deal with these trauma-related issues in different ways. However, it is very important that long-term support is set up for them in order to overcome.
So the United States has done several different techniques to try and decrease the likelihood of school shootings happening. One of the techniques that have been tried are drills. And many wonder if they're like even truly effective. Oftentimes students aren't told ahead of time if a drill is true or not. And so it leaves them thinking that this is the real deal, and they're often experience intense feels of anxiety, dread. Some have written heartbroken letters to their parents. And so it's pretty clear that this causes a lot of stress. Other companies have simulated school shootings in schools and have fired rubber bullets and blank shells to simulate the school shooting. And this has left children vomiting, crying, and with lifelong anxiety issues. These drills on average cost 2.7 million each year, and it can be quite alarming for them. After Columbine happened, 40% of schools would begin practicing school shooting drills. And after Sandy Hook, that number rose to 95% of schools practicing these drills. Another technique that's used is called hardening schools, and it's the idea of almost militarizing these areas in hopes to prevent a shooting from happening. In general, hardening schools may involve the use of SROs, which are student resource officers, restricting access into buildings, as well as the use of metal detectors. It's important to note that the restricting of accesses and metal detectors on average cost about $2.7 billion each year. The use of SROs have become more common as the years have gone by. In 1994, 13% of schools would begin using school resource officers. In 2014, that number rose to 51% of schools using these officers. And on average, they cost $745 million each year for their training and hiring. Their jobs usually consist of going around the schools, making sure the doors are locked, and they're oftentimes also used as a source of discipline. And there's been many questions about whether these officers truly work for preventing school shootings. And research has shown that they're only effective if the students have a positive relationship with the SRO around their school. Other schools, such as Columbine and Virginia Tech, did in fact have an SRO on campus, and this obviously didn't prevent the attacks that happened there. Another form, such as stated for hardening schools, is restricting access. This might be done by requiring students or staff to wear identification cards, entering codes into doors to enter into the building, and having almost an intercom and doorbell kind of system where staff is shown a picture of who's trying to enter, and then they'll admit that person into the building. While these may make the school and the students themselves feel safer, it's important to note that this has little to no effect on violent crime as well as school shootings. Part of this can be because school shooters are oftentimes not strangers in our students themselves. So giving them access to ID cards, the codes, it doesn't prevent them from entering. And in the event that these shooters are in fact strangers to the building, they oftentimes are either let in by staff through the intercom doorbell system, or in some cases they have been shown to shoot out the windows to enter access into the buildings. The final oftentimes used tool for hardening schools are metal detectors, and these cost about $50,000. And as a result of these high expenses, only 10% of schools use every day use it every day. Columbine and Virginia Tech were thinking about using these, but it did not. It has been shown to use deterring effects from individuals bringing in weapons. Only 7.6% would say that they would still bring a weapon though into school. This incident happened in Minnesota where one security guard, one teacher, and 5 students were killed, and then the shooter himself committed suicide. Other suggestions have been made, such as an assault rifle ban and a high-capacity magazine ban, in hopes to fight back for the students.
Okay, for our solution, we propose that each year there will be a day set aside where students and staff will be educated on this topic. During this day, they will have a presentation on the importance of mental health, bullying, and recognizing possible issues on a person that may lead them to harm themselves or others. We will hire a threat assessment expert who will be taking over for this day. Students will also have a mandatory meeting, a once a month mandatory meeting with a threat assessment expert, which will cause them to build a bond and be able to trust and confide in them. We will also have an app that will allow students to anonymously report any activity that they might make them believe another student or person might want to attack the school. On the second half of the day, there will be an active shooter drill where students will receive appropriate training on what to do in case of if a shooting were to happen. To reduce chances of students having panic attacks, they and their parents will be notified of the event beforehand. Okay, so some of you might be wondering what a threat assessment expert is. It's usually a person who has a degree in psychology or related fields. This person will have to know how to properly identify an issue, assess the situation, and manage the individual who might be involved. Having a threat assessment expert will give the students a sense of security, which is very much needed. So Leah talked about the involvement of SROs, which are school resource officers. As you guys can see on that little chart, whatever you want to call it, and there are some good qualities in an SRO. These officers usually have to work with students to enforce the school safety policies and be more physically involved. If a problem were to arise, the SRO would intervene by physically stopping one or more students from harming themselves or others. On the other hand, a threat assessment expert is more of a psychological side, and they focus more on mental health, and they will prevent the student from doing something that the school does not want to happen. Thank you. So police involvement. We plan on having police officers around. This will hopefully make the students feel safe and make a bond where they feel more comfortable around them. Having them around for the drill will allow the students to recognize police involvement in case of a shooting were to happen. So we expect that for the first year, it's going to cost about $130,000 to put this plan into place. To break it down a little bit, $600 would go to implementing or updating safety plans that the school already has in place. $200 would go to the new safety plan, and we're estimating about $15,000 for that. In order to afford this, we will have to draft a referendum. Needed will depend on the size of the school. If the school has a large number of students, then threat assessment experts will have to be hired. The town will then vote and decide how to move on from there. Another thing we could do is come up with fund ideas and host them. And of course, we will be taking donations from community members who might want to donate.
So we're going to go over the solution timeline and key tasks. Obviously, this is a long-term structural change that will take a lot of time to take hold. Schools will also need to obviously clear a day or days in their schedule to include the whole day for presentation and training. and then everyone will be required to download the free app. Our solution will be maintained through the, obviously, as stated before, the monthly checks with the visits to the threat assessment expert, and I will go into how these are going to look like in the next few slides. The student will be assigned a time that works with their class schedule. They will go to the threat assessment experts that is on campus. It is important that they're on campus because then they could have the physical one-on-one time to develop that kind of relationship so they can feel comfortable talking to them. And the threat assessment expert will give them a higher level professional counseling session. The topics covered in the session will be things like students' headspace, their overall feelings, their friend group situation, their home life situation, how school is going overall, how their extracurriculars are going, and their goals that are being completed or set in each of these areas. And the threat assessment expert will be able to help them develop new goals or revise ones that maybe aren't that realistic. This will all be supplemented with the constant readiness of the peers with the free app and the annual or semi-annual presentations that will be conducted through the threat assessment expert. Now, some possible negative effects of our solution are false reports. So say, especially during the start, we could see this happening is people just reporting their buddies because they're not taking it seriously, and or reporting people that they don't like to try to get them in trouble. This also goes along with stereotyping a certain type of person, just too many accounts on that. And then so the actual training of having the police officers at the training through the threat assessment expert would understaff them if something were to happen that would need the police outside of the school that day. Not all students have access to a device, and we're aware of that, and we would have to work through that. And then also not all parents would buy into our solution, which would mean we'd have to work around that as well or convince them. The social effects of our solution we think would be very good. It would allow the students and the families to feel safer in the school systems. It would bring the whole community together and create an overall environment of trust and safety. The economic effects, we believe some could get mad at first. Obviously, as Liz mentioned before, there are many other economic costs of this plan, but just as an example, the creation of the app could potentially cost between $9,000 to $16,000, depending on how high tech it is. But we believe this is a one-time cost, not a recurring fee, so that wouldn't be as much of a problem. And we also believe, as far as the other financial grumblings, they will fade as the community notices the decrease in the violent actions breaking out in the schools, and they will start to appreciate the change that is being done for the headspace of the children and the families overall. And the positive effects will be shown very easily through a progress report that is put together by the threat assessment expert. And the data in this report will be collected through the individual counseling sessions, which will show improvements from the beginning of the year to whenever the progress report is being shown and displayed. They will also get data from the app where students will be able to fill out their feelings and headspace every day, along with the ability to report students anonymously. Now, the app will have a similar style to Campus Clear. Obviously, we all know that we fill out our physical feelings and how we feel physically in the Campus Clear app now. It would be the same kind of UI, same kind of style. It would just be filling out your headspace instead. All these things would serve as a concrete example of the addition of the threat assessment expert being a positive and worthwhile investment. Our solution will work because students will be less likely to have mental health issues. The teachers and the students will be educated on the signs through the training. The threat assessment expert will be able to respond fast and accordingly because they will be physically on campus. The students would have personal connection with the expert, again, because of them physically being there. And the training would also increase the bond with the police that the school and the community have. In conclusion, the students will feel empowered by being able to feel safe by reporting suspicious activity anonymously, and they would obtain confidence and belief in themselves, knowing that they have the education to be able to spot correct at-risk behavior and the physical training of being able to operate if a bad situation like a school shooting does happen. All these factors will come together and save our future generations. Thank you.
All right, so we can take questions in the chat, or you can indicate that you would like to speak and we will call on you. I have a few questions so I can start while people are thinking about their questions. Okay, so you indicated that you're helping with mental health. So are you doing that directly or just through that threat assessment? Like, how are you helping individuals with mental health specifically? I may have missed that. I was taking notes.
So we hope to be able to have like we had said, once a month meetings with these threat assessment experts, and they're able to evaluate like home life, peer group pressure, things like that we had talked about previously. And the hope is that the mental health expert, not the hope, it's the mental the threat assessment expert will be able to handle signs of if someone is having a harder time in school, or if they're feeling more aggressive or things like that. And then with the app, they'll be able to indicate like, I've been feeling really anxious. I rate myself 1 to 10, kind of letting people know how they're feeling beforehand. And then the trainings will also help students realizing those signs in other students or themselves.
But does that address their mental health directly or just indicate that there's a problem?
I think it could help their mental health directly, because like if you're able to reach out for more help, you understand like, okay, this is how I'm feeling, and then the threat assessment expert would see it and be like, hey, I noticed, this is how you're feeling. Do you want to, like, why don't you come on in and we can talk about it?
All right, we have a couple questions in the chat. So Chloe would like to know, it is likely that not all the students would tell the truth on the app. Would you implement some sort of incentive for students to tell the truth?
I think we could do that definitely during the presentations, where we understand that no one, or that there might be cases where people might not tell the truth, but explaining the real need for mental health to students, and talking about normalizing the idea of mental health problems, and having our threat assessment expert be a safe place where there's no judgment towards feelings or any thoughts that they might be having.
And Tori would like to know, what does the process look like after a student reports another in the app? You mentioned there being a possibility of false reports, so how will you address potential threats while also considering that?
So the FBI released this file that said there are different levels of threats, obviously, that are made. And these experts are aware of what is considered a low likely offense, a medium likely offense, and a high likely offense. So in general, people who are considered low likely don't give any information about who's the target. They also don't state a specific time typically, or other common misinformation.
And we are out of time, so we'll have to stop the questions there. Let's give one more round of applause to our presenters today. Thank you guys for joining us.